I'm delighted to be joined this week by Malcom Trigg from Micro Focus, who is going to be talking to us about all things security and particularly security on the mainframe. Obviously, mainframes are a big deal for many organizations, and keeping them safe and secure is key. So welcome, Malcom.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess if we just kick off, how, we live in an ever-changing world, as we know. How has this security landscape changed over, let's say, the past year?
Wow. Well, actually, really, to go back, if I go back the last 20 years,
okay,
give you a good understanding how things have actually changed. And I could probably talk for 2 or 3 hours on that, but I won't. But we can basically split the cybersecurity landscape into 3 different sections, really. The first one is between the years sort of 2000 to 2004, where it was really the era of the worm. And just to give you some context, a worm is basically a piece of malicious software or malware, which is downloaded to your machine by a user, invariably. And once it's on your machine, it will do whatever it's designed to do, but it will also try to replicate itself across other servers, other workstations that it can find. So once it's in there, it tries to work its way through the organization.
And I think we've all heard about, I mean, as a user, I've heard about worms back in the day, but those can also get into mainframes, can they? They can get into the whole...
Not into the mainframe itself, or not as yet. It's not to say they can't, but there's some very famous ones. So, for example, if I said, "I love you," then...
Well, thank you, Malcom. I didn't realize it was that kind of cool.
Absolutely. No, it's not that term of endearment, but actually it's the first sort of worm attack that was kind of registered in sort of year 2000 in May. It started off in the Philippines, where somebody wrote some software and they used different exploits. One was to use the fact that most people used Outlook, and they sent an email out to people as spam, basically with a subject title of "I love you." So it was exploiting social engineering. Typically, human would be curious, want to know what the content of the email is. And that's the first job of any hacker, get you to open that email in the first place. Once you've opened it, there was an attachment called lovetletter.txt. Now, we all know TXT files are harmless.
Yeah.
What harm can be done by clicking on it? It's a text file. But there's another exploit. We all know by our own file systems, when we look at a file name, and we know it's a Word document, it doesn't have the word .doc on the end, because Windows hides that from you. And this used this exploit because the real name of the file was "I love you," but it was lovetletter.txt.vbs, and the VBS was hidden. And that was a Visual Basic script. Once you clicked on that script, it emailed itself to everybody in your contact list and then started overwriting files in your file system. Not a very nice love letter, I can show you.
Okay.
Even though the name love letter sounds very nice, of course, it really wasn't. But the important thing to remember here was actually the fact these worms cost the industry $100 billion in damages. So it's a lot of money in that time. And these were done in those days for curiosity, disruption, or notoriety. But then the next big change was in 2005 to 2012. The hackers realized, there's money to be made in this. So they tried to monetize all these particular worms that they created, rather than just being purely to cause damage. They now wanted to actually generate money. And that led very nicely then on to the latest, which is 2013 onwards, which in 2013, September the 5th, the world woke up to a crypto locker, which basically took on 2 different technologies, encryption and cryptocurrencies. And it was aimed at basically locking the systems of a company and then demanding a ransom, which is paid in cryptocurrencies. Because before, when they tried this, companies got around it, but if you encrypt something, you can't get around it.
And Malcom, do we ever know who starts these, where they're from?
I would imagine the agencies probably have an idea, but of course, proving it is sometimes very difficult, and they're very sophisticated attacks as well. But the key to a lot of these attacks are what we call phishing, and we've all had them. We've all had the email through saying, "This is your bank. There's an emergency. Could you please log in immediately?" And we know to ignore them. But some of them are very sophisticated. For example, if you received an email from me saying, "I'm from Microsoft Office 365, there's a problem with your Outlook account. Could you just please log on for me?" You would probably log on, especially if I made it sound urgent. I'd make it look like the Microsoft website. you'd put your details in, which would be your corporate credentials. And once I've got that, you'd continue your working day. Nothing would change for you. Everything's fine. What you're not aware of is I've now got your credentials. And 61% of these hacks are all caused by using somebody's real credentials. Because organizations, yeah.
So they're not trying to break in per se. They're trying to get the legitimate details to break
Absolutely
in.
right.
So,
They've realized now, for example, I imagine your house has got locks on it, locks on the windows. So the perimeter attacks are becoming more difficult. However, if I impersonate you, I can get into your house. And that's what they're doing now. They're actually impersonating a real person, a real user of that organization. And you can imagine now, if you're sat in your house and somebody comes in who looks like a friend of yours, as far as you are, they are, how do you defend against that? It's very difficult because you're now being attacked by somebody who has a legitimate reason to access your systems. And that becomes very, very difficult for organizations.
And I guess protecting against those in a broader sense is always going to be, there's always going to be a limit to what we can do because the vulnerability is humans.
Absolutely. The big vulnerability is humans. It's this social attacks basically getting their credentials. That's always the difficult thing. Now, the one big thing we can do, and when research is being done on companies who've had these ransomware attacks, it always comes back to the basics of security. Multi-factor authentication is a big thing here. So, for example, you log onto your system with user ID and passwords, and recently Micro Focus have now adopted multi-factor authentication for most of its systems. It's a little bit annoying, granted. So when I log onto systems, I have to type my user ID and password, and now I have to go to my mobile phone and type in to my system on the laptop a one-time password given to me on my mobile phone. So it uses two factors of authentication, something I know, which is my user ID and password, and something that I have, my mobile phone, to get that all-important one-time pass ticket. Now, that makes it more difficult for somebody impersonating me remotely because they don't have my phone. So multi-factor authentication is the key to stopping these type of attacks.
So where do you think the next large-scale attack might come from?
Well, this is sort of as we move on to the future, it's moving on to things like Internet of Things. Things are all interconnected. There's devices in many organizations which talk to each other, and quite often they have low-level security. Because when you buy them, you're buying them for the features. When you buy a television, it's a smart TV, it's connected to the internet. Do you look at the security aspect? Or do you look at the fact it can connect to these channels, it can give you this, it can give you this. You don't even give security a thought. But these devices are part of the whole Internet of Things, and they can be hacked. So in the future, these devices will start to become part of the problem.
I think we'll come back to that because that's really interesting. I guess next, so we talked about those worms and the love letters and the impersonating banks. How does this play out with the mainframe, and how are mainframes protected? Yeah, I think earlier you said that mainframes haven't been hacked. How does that side of things work?
Yeah, I think in many organizations, it's still, I mean, there's an old expression in securities, which is sort of security through obscurity. Because the hacker doesn't know about it, you're kind of safe. In the early days, common port numbers were changed. Rather than using port 23 for Telnet, you'd use 2323. They'll never guess it, or guess it. Well, guess what? They will guess it. They will know it. They will find it. But that kind of still exists with a mainframe because security organizations, they're very good at putting enterprise solutions in place. But when they're putting those same enterprise controls for the mainframe, they don't know how to do it. And this is really where Micro Focus come in, because we have those controls, we have those tools to help in that specific area around the mainframe with our host connectivity product portfolios. Okay,
and so how secure are those? So you say in 30 years people have never got through. Do you think people will still try? Are there people still trying to attack mainframes?
Oh, yes, indeed. And there's been some large-scale attacks on mainframes with large data breaches. Because if you're an organization like a bank or a large organization where your core business systems is on a mainframe, guess where the hackers want to get to?
Of course.
To the mainframe. So they will find a way of getting there. And how do they get to the mainframe? They get through the terminal emulator, because that is the gateway into the mainframe. It's your workstation into the mainframe, if you like. So it's under the same attack surface as your desktop PC is. It has to be locked down in just the same way.
So does that then come back to the human factor, that approach?
It comes back to more of a IT-based factor. Because the controls, all our Micro Focus terminal emulators are capable of plugging into a management and security framework, which protects the terminal emulator from somebody even gaining access to it. So, for example, if you came to my desk and you tried to log onto the mainframe, you'd get the logon screen. You wouldn't have my user ID and password, but you shouldn't even get to logon screen. You should be prevented from even getting that far. And using the Microsoft toolset, unless you're the genuine owner of those credentials, you can't even get as far as using the terminal emulator.
Fine. Well, sounds pretty good. So I won't try and hack into something because I've got no idea where I'd start. So one of the sort of key sort of themes of Tech Talks with Matt, which is the series of podcasts that we're running at the moment, is what keeps CIOs awake. And obviously security and risk and hacks and public problems with big large scale data breaches. So how do we, as Micro Focus, how do you talk to CIOs? How would you give them peace of mind with our technology?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one thing that keeps CIOs up at night is waking up on a morning, having their breakfast with the morning newspaper and seeing their company name on the front page because they've had 30 million records breached from their data systems.
Absolutely.
So we can certainly help them get a better night's sleep by saying, look, we can protect the mainframe. So therefore, if somebody does get into your network, because you can never say they can't, you can never be 100% secure, then you've got to be able to take a view of let's limit the damage they can do. And that is basically down to, and again, it comes back to basics, least privilege. You don't have full access to all the systems. I don't have access to all the systems. I can't access them all because I don't need to do my role. And yet people with a terminal emulator are given access to all the functions. And not everybody in the organization needs to be able to create macros, run macros, change security settings. They may need to change colors. But beyond that, most users don't need to do it. But guess what? They can do it. And this opens up a whole attack surface for some malicious code to come in through an email to attack the emulator, put some malicious code into the session file to be able to then start recording what's happening on the mainframe. So you've got to protect against that by locking the terminal emulator down.
It's interesting you say about the sort of limiting what people can do. I previously worked in a bank, in a sort of corporate head office, and it reminds me of where our retail staff had access to the bank back end, so into the mainframe effectively, but had no access to the internet. As a corporate employee, I had access to the internet, but didn't have access to the banking systems. So if they couldn't get hacked via some malicious website, and if I did, it wouldn't matter because we couldn't get into the data. So is that the same sort of thing that they're doing there?
It is. It's an organization's taken a role-based access control methodology. Okay. So rather than saying, and it can be lazy in security, the easiest thing to do in the world as a security officer is say everyone's got admin rights because I don't need to bother then. You can all use the data, but I trust you, nothing's going to happen. But of course, you can't take that view. So if somebody can only do a certain job, what do they need to do that job? They can only access what they need to do their job. If their role changes, it's important, therefore, that those responsibilities change and the old ones disappear as well. So it's equally important that you don't get scope creep with people changing jobs in the organization as well.
Yeah, and so I think in terms of the future, as we touched on earlier, and to come back to on that specific note, are those sort of access controls, are the methodologies there continually changing? Is there things that they're preparing against in the future?
They will do, yes. I mean, multi-factor authentication is a big thing at the moment. And there are basically three factors, as I mentioned before, but there's also a fourth factor, which is geofencing. This is your location. So again, it makes it even more difficult for a remote hacker to try and use your credentials. Because if I'm trying to access the mainframe from my desk in the office, no problem at all. If I move to the coffee shop down the road or sit on the train, try to access the mainframe, I can block access to the mainframe from outside the organization. So again, there's that extra factor. And I'm sure as time goes on, more factors will come along, which will make it more and more difficult for hackers to actually get, because the more factors you have, the less likely it is that somebody can actually use your credentials.
Interesting. And one of the points that has been a big topic for a number of years, I guess, is the Internet of Things. Now, what I immediately thought of was my car connects to the internet.
Yes.
So is a hacker's going to try and break into my car or change my radio station? What could they do?
Yeah, well, if you look, I mean, some stats said in 2019 there were 10 billion connected devices across the globe, and that's set to rise to 30.9 billion by 2025, and that will continue to rise as time goes on. As you mentioned now, Tesla cars, other cars are all connected, and if someone hacks into those systems, it may be for malicious intent, such as external agents. It could be external countries wanting to cripple places. They could get into these systems and stop your car working. So therefore, it could cause knock-on effects. People can't get to work. People can't get to, if the doctors, etc., they can't get to the office, can't get to work. So it could be for malicious reasons.
Yeah, and as I said, I might change my radio station to classical. It's not my thing. So yeah, that would be terrible.
But they could also do things like, for example, track where you travel.
Yeah,
that could be important to somebody to know where you actually work. If you worked at an Amazon data center, knowing where that data center was, because they tend to hide the locations, knowing where that data center is could be important information to somebody.
But that's an interesting point around knowing where people are, because I think most of us openly share where we're going because we use Google Maps or we use Apple Maps on our phones. We share our locations. Is that making people more vulnerable? Is that a security risk going forward? Or?
Well, what hackers like is information. The more information they get, the better. And I see it all the time on Facebook, harmless questions. You know, give me your so-and-so name, your mother's maiden name and something. And people are actively giving. I'm thinking, well, you're giving some security questions away here. And you know that behind some of these Facebook entries are malicious people who are collecting and harvesting this information for their own use. And the more information they can get, and they'll get it bit by bit, you know, what year were you born in? Who was in the charts on the date you were born? It's all collecting bits by stealth to form a picture of you as an individual, so that they can then form an attack on you to actually gain information, to gain some financial reward from that.
Okay. And what else is...
I hope you can sleep tonight, actually, after this discussion.
Well, no, I'm going to have to change the name of all my 17 cats because I've shared too much information.
That's it, yes.
And so what else, you know, again, back to that sort of keeping CIOs awake. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure these guys are paid enough. They can stay awake, but no, I'm kidding. What other things should they be thinking about in the future? Not worrying about, but thinking about and being conscious of.
It's looking for where the next attack's going to come from. Because they've all got used to ransomwares out there now. They're trying to put things in place. If you put multi-factor authentication in place, it doesn't stop it dead, but it makes it more difficult. But going forward, moving into the cloud, that's going to keep the CIO awake at night. We're now moving systems away from physical buildings that we owned and we managed and we had control to, and we knew what was happening with them, into a cloud where I don't even know where the servers are. How can I protect them? So those kind of things will certainly keep CIOs awake at night, because you're trusting the security now or the physical security of these servers to somebody else. With cloud computing, you're still responsible, of course, for the infrastructure security and everything else. That doesn't change. But there's now different skill sets required. So you now need to take your current IT staff on that journey and train them in order to be able to use the skills of the future.
And I guess that's what's happening with cloud, and
it is.
You know, the big companies getting involved. There's these things must be made secure, otherwise the business model wouldn't work. Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Malcolm. I think, as you said, we could talk for hours on this. You're a fascinating man. Is there anything final you want to leave? Any messages for the viewers? Yes,
the one thing I would like to say, just to finish off with, is really don't forget the mainframe, and not just mainframe. Don't forget any of your host systems, whether they're AS400, Unix, Open VMS machines. They all need the same level of protection as the other systems that you have in your organization.
Well, thank you so much, Malcolm. There's clearly a lot more we could talk about, and I really do feel like we have merely scratched the surface. Fascinating area, and but thank you. I think you've given some really good ideas for helping our CIOs sleep at night. And I think there's a lot more, obviously, that can be done with working with companies like Micro Focus to protect more. But thank you very much for that, and thank you for your time, Malcolm.
Thank you, Matt.
Brilliant, and thank you for tuning in today. We'll look forward to catching you on the next episode.